Greetings, programs. Welcome to Rationality from AI to Zombies, Chapter 27. Absence of evidence is evidence of absence. From Robin Dawes' Rational Choice in an Uncertain World. In fact, this post hoc fitting of evidence to hypothesis was involved in a most grievous chapter in United States history, the internment of Japanese Americans at the beginning of the Second World War. When California Governor Earl Warren testified before a congressional hearing in San Francisco on February 21st, 1942, a questioner pointed out that there had been no sabotage or any other type of espionage by the Japanese Americans up until that time. Warren responded, "I take the view that this lack of subversive activity is the most ominous sign in our whole situation. It convinces me, more than perhaps any other factor, that the sabotage we are to get, the fifth column activities are to get, are timed just like Pearl Harbor was timed. I believe we are just being lulled into a false sense of security." End quote. Consider Warren's argument from Bayesian's perspective. When we see evidence, hypotheses that assign a higher likelihood to their evidence gain probability at the expense of hypotheses that assigned a lower likelihood to the evidence. This is a phenomenon of relative likelihoods and relative probabilities. You can assign a high likelihood to the evidence and still lose probability mass to some other hypothesis, if that other hypothesis assigns a likelihood that is even higher. Warren seems to be arguing that, given that we see no sabotage, this confirms that a fifth column exists. You could argue that a fifth column might delay sabotage, but the likelihood is still higher that the absence of a fifth column would perform an absence of sabotage. Let E stand for the observation of sabotage and not E for the observation of no sabotage. The symbol H1 stands for the hypothesis of a Japanese-American fifth column, and H2 for the hypothesis that no fifth column exists. The conditional probability of E given H is how confidently we'd expect to see the evidence E if we assumed the hypothesis H were true. Whatever the likelihood that a fifth column would do no sabotage, the probability of P not E by H1, it won't be as large as the likelihood that there's no sabotage given that there's no fifth column. The probability of P by not E H2. So, observing a lack of sabotage increases the probability that no fifth column exists. A lack of sabotage does not prove that no fifth column exists. The absence of proof is not proof of absence. In logic, A implies B is not equivalent to not A implies not B. But in probability theory, absence of evidence is always evidence of absence. If E is a binary event and P, H by E, is greater than P, H, i.e. seeing E increases the probability of H, then P, H not E, is less than P, H, i.e. failure to observe E decreases the probability of H. The probability of P by H is a weighted mix of P by H by E and P by H by not E, and necessarily lies between the two. If any of this sounds at all confusing, see an intuitive explanation of Bayesian reasoning in this book. Under the vast majority of real-life circumstances, a cause may not reliably produce signs of itself, but the absence of the cause is even less likely to produce the signs. The absence of an observation may be strong evidence of absence or very weak evidence of absence, depending on how likely the cause is to produce the observation. The absence of an observation that is only weakly permitted, even if the alternative hypothesis does not allow it at all, is very weak evidence of absence, though it is evidence nonetheless. This is a fallacy of gaps in the fossil record. Fossils form only rarely. It is futile to trumpet the absence of a weakly permitted observation when so many strong observations have already been recorded. But if there are no positive observations at all, it is time to worry, hence the Fermi paradox. Your strength as a rationalist is your ability to be more confused by fiction than by reality. If you are equally good at explaining any outcome, you have zero knowledge. The strength of the model is not what it can explain, but what it can't, for only prohibitions constrain anticipation. If you don't notice when your model makes the evidence unlikely, you might as well have no model. And you might as well have no evidence, no brain, and no eyes. Here ends chapter 27. Now for my thoughts. Okay, I really hate having to speak out big pages full of formulas, especially if they're formulas using American-style symbols that I don't recognize. But that's not a real issue here. This chapter builds on the previous one, and some of the things have been mentioned in previous chapters. Specifically, it's not what your hypothesis or ideas can explain, but what they can rule out, what they can not explain, that matters. The universe is a big place full of crazy, crazy stuff, as any physicist will tell you. There is a near infinite supply of bizarre and amazing things that something could be. The strength of any given theory, though, is what it stamps out, what possibilities it cuts out of the mess of infinite stuff. And so, while an absence of evidence isn't proof that something is not there, it is evidence that something is not there. For example, you can be reasonably certain that if you look in your pocket and don't find a full-grown African bull elephant, that you can be reasonably certain there is no full-grown African bull elephant in your pocket. Despite the general difficulty of ruling out negatives, of proving a negative. How many times do you realistically have to search your pocket to discover no full-grown African elephant in there? I would say, not much. And if any of this seemed, between the verbiage, to be a little bit hauntingly familiar, as if there was something like this that you'd encountered in the world, it may be that you've encountered a conspiracy theorist in the past. Because this is the one thing that they are truly bad at. Every chunk of evidence that you would expect for a sinister government cover-up or a worldwide order conspiracy thing that isn't there only confirms to them, not that it isn't there. No, that would be too easy. No, what it confirms to them is that they are even more powerful than we thought, because they are able to cover up even that. Ooh, they're everywhere. Whereas a rationalist, or even just a relatively logical person, would point out that people make mistakes. And huge conspiracies include a lot of people, that's a lot of chances for mistakes, and they would have slipped up by now, and they apparently haven't. This is why a lot of conspiracy theorists also simultaneously hold the idea that the government are incredibly incompetent because they leave all these clues lying around, but yet are super powerful and able to also simultaneously cover up any real clues or evidence. It's not a rational perspective. Anyway, that's all for this episode. Next time I shall try to have a real episode and not just the audiobook. As you might have guessed, the audiobook is something that lets me fill in some space and time, because it doesn't require me to write up a huge script and plan things out. Which is fun, but also rather laborious when there's a lot going on, and I kind of have a lot going on at the moment. So, bye for now.